before we jump into all of the details in the content, some housekeeping. We are here, we are live, so anything could happen. I have dogs in my house, so I apologize if you hear them bark at any point. There may be technical, hopefully not, but just bear with us. This is our first LinkedIn Live. And Laura already shared to take notes and write down your questions so that you don't forget if we're not in a place where we can pause for questions.
Yeah, that's right. And this is an audio only event, which I like personally because we can all dress comfortably, right? So anyway, but what we ask that you do is if you do want to raise your hand and come up on stage to ask a question, make sure that you're in a quiet space when it's your turn to speak, when we invite you up. And this live participation, you can use your cell phone, but sometimes people have difficulty with that. So usually it works best from a laptop and if you're wearing headphones. But again, if you're joining us on a mobile device, it likely will work just fine given our test yesterday.
So I think we're going to start here with common errors. So when we first got together and started talking about resumes and the content for this, it was reassuring for us as working with two different types of demographic of people and different industries that we have caught sort of similar or the same common errors on the documents. So we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to give you a lot of information very quickly. So like Laura said, taking notes is important. And also, this is just my professional opinion. At the end of the day, this is your resume, your document. You have sole rights to it. If you don't like what I'm saying or you don't agree with my suggestion, that's okay, right? Because everybody's resume doesn't need to look exactly the same. But here are some common issues that I see. The first one being your address. We do not need a physical address on your resume or a mailing address on your resume. That is outdated practice for, you don't need it because you're going to probably put your address on the application somewhere at some point. So you're taking up a line of space for your physical address and it's not needed. You can, however, have a city and state located on your resume in the header, especially if you're applying locally. I think that's really important. But for me, for those of you on the call that know me personally, I've lived in 5 different states. Working in higher education, it often meant if I wanted to move up, I needed to move out. So I've lived in 5 states, so it didn't necessarily help me to have the address on there. So that is up to you. If you feel that it is important, you can keep it. If you're okay with removing it, I suggest doing so. I still see when I'm reviewing resumes that references available upon request. And I will suggest that anyone who has that, take it off. Because one, duh, right? So we know that if you are going to get hired and you want the job, you're going to give them your references. So that is just a pointless statement, again, to take up unnecessary space on your document, especially if you're trying to fit things onto one page. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Bulleting formatting. This is the number one thing I help people with their resumes outside of formatting. So for me, it's important to know what your bullets should include and not include. So you don't necessarily need to focus on the mundane tasks of your job, like emailing or phone calls, whatever that looks like for you, filing, organizing. We're really focused on your accomplishments and tasks and skills that you've used to be successful in your job. I also tell folks to assume that the reader has no idea what you're talking about. I use myself as an example. When I talked to my family when I worked in higher ed, and I'm sure that this is a lot of industries, not just higher ed specific, they had no idea what I did. When I worked in student activities, I planned parties for the campus, is how people generally thought I did my job. And that's just not true. So you want to make sure that you are explicitly listing out what your jobs were in your major accomplishments. I will tell you that making this transition from higher ed to corporate, everyone thinks when they see education that we're just teachers. So make it super easy for the person or computer reading your resume to find common keywords, and we're going to dive into that more later too, and keeping it as short and sweet but detailed as you can.
And using those action verbs to lead your bullet points, that's really important. So managed, developed, coordinated, right? So those kinds of things help people to have a more clear idea of what you're doing. Kacey, I have a question for you. So we have been going through COVID, right? And a lot of people during COVID have not had a chance to work. They had to drop out of the workforce or take other jobs that were more convenient for their living situation. So what do we do about gaps in our resume these days? Do we need to address them still?
No, absolutely not. A resume that you're applying for a job with is a customized document. This is not a historical context document that has everything you've ever done. When you hear somebody say you should customize your resume, they're just saying that you should include things on the resume that are going to be as relevant to the job you're applying for as possible. So, for example, after I am finished with my first job in corporate, I probably will remove a lot of the higher education content because it's not going to be needed. It's not relevant in the direction that I want to go. So it's a little bit of a hard pill to swallow, right? You're so proud of the work that you have done, but you do need to think about the person reading your resume and not your feelings.
Exactly.
So with the gaps, I don't think it's important to address them. I know that LinkedIn specifically has just added in where you can justify gaps. But for me, that could lead to personal identifying information. I took 2 years off because I had a baby. Now the person who might be hiring me may think, well, is she going to have to take off a lot because I just had a baby? She just had a baby. Is she going to have to leave early to get her kid from school? You're just going to open the door for implicit bias that the recruiter or person interviewing you or looking at your content may not even realize that they have. So I would say that don't worry about gaps. If you have them, if there is a gap between two really relevant experiences, that's a different scenario, right? Somebody may ask, and it's really up to you on how you professionally talk through that. And we are doing a session in the future on interviewing authentically and confidently, so we can definitely talk more about how to address gaps if you're asked about them. But what I would say is leave that to LinkedIn. If you choose to use the gaps feature, you absolutely can, but you honestly do not have to.
Yeah, so this idea of personal information and trying to tailor our resumes so that we're not giving away things that we shouldn't, I really think that's a unique idea. A lot of the people who I work with from other countries, when I ask them, what do you have on your resume? Or when I see resumes, a lot of times I will see personal information right there at the top, like a photo, the whole mailing address, like you said before, but things like, well, I'm married and I have X number of kids and I have, right? So this kind of personal information, not including it, I know it probably feels a little bit strange to people to withhold that information because it is such an important part of their lives. But yeah, like you said, implicit bias, we want to avoid it. And just having experience being on hiring committees, I remember going through very carefully and making sure that we were not asking about and looking for certain information, like you said, about do you have a kid, are you married, and so on. So yeah, other things that people probably should avoid putting on their resumes, what do you think? Date of birth? I don't think that has any place on a resume. Do you, Kacey?
Mm-hmm. I do not. No, you don't need pretty much any personal identifying information other than if you want to put your pronouns. I think that that's very appropriate as somebody who has a gender neutral name. I think it's important for me to identify that I use she, her pronouns, but that's really the only thing that I would suggest adding are the pronouns. I would omit all the other personal information.
Right. So you're not going to put your marital status. You're not going to put your age. You're not going to put your photograph. So yeah, that's good. Now, one thing that I find interesting is this idea of contact information, right? We want people to have a way to get a hold of us, especially if we're going to be applying for a job elsewhere. But if we have a phone number that is outside of the United States, so this is for those of you who are looking for jobs in the US, but you're not in the United States, what do you think about putting the phone number on the resume, Kacey? Because I've seen that that's not a good idea.
I think that if you want to include a phone number, there are things like the Google phone numbers that you can mask, right? That's not a real phone number. It's just your computer phone number. So there are options to get around that if that's something that people are concerned about. The only time I really tell folks not to have their email or phone number on their documents in their header is if you're going to be publishing your resume out in the world, such as including an attachment on a website if you have a portfolio of some sort, or if you're uploading your resume as a PDF onto LinkedIn. I just wouldn't have that information because now everybody has access to it. When you're applying for a job, you know who's going to now have access to your personal information, such as your email and phone number. So I would just have a version of your resume that if you're going to share it out publicly, and I know a lot of people do that on LinkedIn when they're open for work, that's totally fine. I just wouldn't want you to have your cell phone number and email out there and then you're going to get a bunch of spam.
Yeah, and even worse than spam, identity theft, right? We want to avoid identity theft. So we don't want to give people things that can help them assume our identity and then, open credit cards or not open credit cards, but right. All of those things we want to avoid. Good. So let's see here. Kacey, before we go on, I think it's about time for us to call for any questions related to what
Absolutely.
we just asked. So if any of you would like to raise your hand and ask a question about something we have just spoken about, please go ahead and do that, and we'll invite you to the stage, and we'll spend a few minutes answering your questions, and then we're going to move on to talk about something else. So let's see. Do we have any questions? Yes, we have one person. Let's see. Shake, I wonder if you have a question right now. Let's see. Nope. Okay. Yeah, I think he was being very helpful in the beginning to put his hand up to... Good. I'm glad. All right. So how is everybody doing so far? Let's see. Are you still awake? Let's use the reaction button. Show us you're still there, and then we'll move on. Yeah, thank you. Fausti, you know me well. All right. Good. Thank you so much. So
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. So Kacey, just to zoom out briefly and one more time, because this bears repeating, how would you describe the purpose of the resume in the United States?
It's the first impression, right? So I don't know how many of you, I would actually like to see this. Let me pull up the list of you here. How many of you have sat on a search committee before, if you can use the thumbs up reaction? Let's see.
Yeah, a lot of us.
Yeah. So for those of you who have sat on search committees, you know what a bad resume looks like.
Yes.
It's really obvious, right? I've sat on search committees where the resume document wasn't actually a resume. They sent me something else. They just titled it resume, right? So you do want to make sure that you are saving the correct versions of your resume, titling them appropriately so that you don't get confused on that. But yes, it is pretty obvious when you initially open an applicant's resume, if it's well organized, clean, concise, relevant versus somebody who is using way too large font, huge margins, lots of white space, 4 pages long, and doesn't get to the point. There's going to be huge differences, right? So your first impression should be that it is clean, neat, organized, and to the point, so that you're making it, whoever is looking at your resume, whether it's a computer or a person, want to keep reading. That is the whole point and purpose of the resume, and catching the reader, their attention from the very beginning. So you do want to ask yourself, if this job is going to help me get the next job, and the answer is no, you're going to have to remove it. That does not mean it's not a valuable experience, but it's not relevant to the job you want. So the purpose is to just get to the interview, right? That's like the main goal, and that is your first impression.
I'm so glad that you said that. And, you know, it really, what you just said about whatever experience you have on the resume being important, but if it doesn't have to do with the job, if it's not apparent, to just leave it off if you need that space, that really resonates with me as somebody who has written a lot, and you want to keep all of the things you've written, but no, it's not important. Good. So something else that caught my ear, Kacey, was that we really need to pay attention to the audience when we write our resume, because like you said, the purpose is to make a good impression, to get to the interview. And you keep mentioning computers. So yes. This is something that I think shocks a lot of people who have been out of the job search game for a while, is that computers, the ATS, the applicant tracking system, that's the first gatekeeper, isn't it? So can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yes, oftentimes it's a computer seeing your resume first before a person. I will say that my little side note is that if you were to look at a smaller company, a startup company, they might not have a human resources office. There might be one employee who has to do it all because they're just starting. But for those bigger jobs, bigger corporations that are well established, you're probably going to run into applicant tracking systems at some point. Ironically, that's what I switched into. I work at Paycor full-time with the applicant tracking system. So for me, it's coming full circle. I knew about ATS before moving to Paycor because I worked in career services, but here's what you ultimately need to know. The resume is being scanned through the applicant tracking system to simply make the recruiter or the manager's job easier. So if you're not customizing your resume to be relevant and including keywords from the job description in your documents, it might not pick up that you're qualified or a good candidate. So one of the things that I use as an example with a lot of people that I coach are switching the words from student, if you work in education, to client. They're still our client as a higher ed professional, and it's just using the language that the corporate world uses. So it is important to use as many keywords as possible, because that's how you're going to get through those applicant tracking systems. They're looking for a certain percentage of keywords, and we'll talk about some resources later that will help you sort of check that. But also, that's what I do. This is my job. My part-time job with my business is that every time I do a resume for a client, I ask them to send me at least one job description that you're interested in, so I can show you exactly what I'm talking about when I'm talking about utilizing keywords. So yeah, you want to make sure that you're keeping the information as simple as possible, easy to read. We know, based off of research, recruiters only look at your resume 30 to 60 seconds. So you want to hit them with the most important information towards the top of the first page if it's more than one. And you also want to avoid using templates, tables, figures, graphics, your picture. All of that just makes it more confusing, and also it doesn't read as well. So you just want to make sure that you're keeping it simple. Please do not pay for a resume online. When I worked in higher ed, I had students come like, I paid $3 for this. And I'm like, I would have done that for you for free. Of course, I don't offer free resume reviews as a career coach now with my own business. However, there are easier ways for you to have somebody help you with that.
Definitely. Speaking of that, one of the people here listening in to the live, Mohammed sent us a resume and he said, could you have a look? So I'm looking at it and the first thing I see is his lovely photograph. And while that's nice for social media, if you're applying for a job in the United States, the photo could throw off the ATS system. So you don't want that. Kacey, I'm not sure if you have a copy of this, but what I see on his resume are these nice icons right before each heading. So, these are, I mean, they're really helpful. Like if I were the first person seeing it, I would say, oh, that looks really nice. It's easy to read. It's concise. Yes, there are some things that he could do to improve it, but I find it easy to read. But I'm wondering if the icons before each heading would mess up the ATS system.
Yeah, I'm not 100%. I'll be honest. I don't answer things and give false information. I'm not sure about icons and those types of things. For me, I always would just venture to say, be more safe. And I know that everybody else on this call cannot see what we're seeing with Mohammed's resume. He's just using little icons to indicate different sections such as education. So I'm not 100% sure about small icons like that, but for me, if it's typed in Word and you keep it simple and save it as a PDF, you're safe. That is what I do know.
Good. Well, that is a PDF, so that's good.
Yes.
Awesome. So here's something that, well, actually, we have a question. John's got a question, and Fausti's got a question. Why don't we take a few minutes to invite them up to the stage? So when we invite you to the stage, we will ask you to unmute, just so that we don't have people talking over each other. But yeah, if you have questions about what we have just discussed, we will invite you up to the stage. So let's see. Let's go with John. Hello there. What questions do you have or comments?
Good evening. I'm from Nigeria here.
Hey, that's awesome. Good evening to you.
Yeah, I'm really, really much happy about the program, about the events. So what I want to ask is, I really want to ask if Kacey can tell us how much dollars she's charging for the resume, because I would love my resume to be, checked and also be vetted as well. So that's what I wanted to ask.
Yeah, that's a great question, and we will talk about our services at the end. But to answer your question, it depends. So I offer resume reviews without a meeting, and that would be $50. And then if you want to have me work on your resume and have a career coaching appointment with that, where we can go through the edits and changes and suggestions, that's $75. I'm probably one of the cheapest career coaches out there, and I do that because I do it because I love it. I do not want career coaching to be my full-time job. So I do it. I keep it at a low fee because I want to help people, because I genuinely care. And I've been through the job search so many times that, people say, you have such knowledge and talent with this stuff. To me, it's simple, but I've also been trained in it. You all don't have that information being shared with you every day. So yeah, it's fairly inexpensive if you were to look at other coaches online, at least $100+.
Thank you. But once I'm ready, I think I'll be looking for discount from you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for your question, John. Thank you. Great. Fausti, what's your question?
Hi, Kacey. Hi, Dr. So to everybody, I know Dr. Lara and I know Kacey both in professional settings, and I can say they are A-list and beyond. And so I'm so excited to hear from you, Kacey. It's been ages.
I know, it's been a long time. I used to work in the Career and Leadership Development Center at Ohio University, where I met Lara and Fausti. So, networking and maintaining those connections. It's great to hear from you.
Awesome. So I have a question to the length of a resume. You know, I'm 10, and so midlife, I have over 15 years diverse work experience, and I've been struggling to reduce my resume to be a resume and not a CV, but I still have 5 pages, and I look at it and it feels like everything is important based on the kind of jobs I'm applying for in higher education. What's your page limit or guide in terms of making sure you're not going far too long in terms of scaling down your experiences? And thank you for.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. You're going to hear different things from different people. My own personal and professional stance is I don't care if you have more than one page, as long as the front page of your resume, the one that is most likely going to be viewed, has the most relevant information. I think that, for example, my CV from working in education was 4 pages, and it was really squeezing on 4 pages. And I cut it down to 2. So I would just say that if you're going to, my rule of thumb is if you're going to go on to another page, just make it significant and meaningful enough. And if it's only going on by a couple of sentences and lines, let me reformat it for you. I will make it fit. So that's just the way that I view it, because I don't want to tell someone whether their experience is going to help them get the next job, because what if I say, you can remove that, and then that's the one thing that they think you're missing, right? So you're going to have to make those decisions for yourself of what can be cut. But again, coming from someone who worked in higher ed to corporate and had that CV version, I got rid of every publication, every presentation, my professional associations, because it just wasn't relevant anymore. Doesn't mean that stuff does not live on my LinkedIn. If you go to my LinkedIn, you see my entire context of my employment history and all of the things that I have done. So don't think of your resume as your only shot. It's the first shot, right? So you need to get their attention. You need to want them to read more. And how do you do that, right? That's what we're talking about today, is making sure you're asking yourself that question. Is this going to help me get the next job? Because you're not applying for your past jobs anymore.
That's really helpful. Fausti, one thing I want to point out, and before I point this out, I'd like to ask our audience here, please give me a thumbs up if you are a researcher. In other words, if you are a graduate student or faculty or somebody who writes research papers, because there is something that you need to know. This is a place, okay, great, Marcela is, and Fausti is, of course. I'm sure there are probably more here. But what you can do in order to make sure that there is a nice place for your research publications and presentations to live is you can get yourself an ORCID account. ORCID is spelled it's spelled ORCID. I'll spell it one more time, ORCID, ORCID. This is something that you want to have your research in, because it assigns you an ID number and you can list everything there. So that way the next time you publish something, it'll be in your profile. So you can always, I would imagine, Kacey, you can put your ORCID ID.
Absolutely. Just like you could put your LinkedIn ID. So in your header with your name and your contact information, you can have a website link that will take them to more information.
Great. Thank you. Fausti, thank you for the question. Let's see. We've got 2 more questions before we move on to this next part. So I'm trying to invite people up to stage. Kacey, could you see if you have any luck with it? Thank you. In the meantime, I see a lovely 1-page resume, although it is saved as cover letter. So this is from Yamna. Thank you for sharing. Oh my gosh.
I cannot invite anyone to the stage.
Oh, I wonder what happened.
I don't want to interrupt, but it's not, I think, because you're the main host.
Ah, okay. Let me try something different. Oh, I got it. Okay. So just briefly, Yamna, your this looks like a resume to me. It's beautiful. I'm not entirely sure how well it would do with ATS, so that would be a question for Kacey. But the only thing I would say is if my eyes were the first ones looking at your resume here, Yamna, I would think, wow, this is easy to read. It's chock full of good information, but there are a few things that you can do to make it easier to read. And this is something I want to share with all of you. That's why I brought it up. So I mentioned before how we should start those bullet points with verbs whenever possible. Not only do we want to do that for clarity, but we also want to do it because cognitively, when we're reading, it's easier for us to understand if the bullets all follow the same kind of grammatical structure. All right, so that was my 2 cents. Let's see, we have Leslie who has joined us here. Leslie, go ahead and unmute yourself. What's your question? Thanks for joining us. Sometimes.
I'm sorry about that. Hi. Yes. Good afternoon. Hi. This question is for Kacey. For your resumes, and I was wondering, do you also help with LinkedIn profiles?
I do.
And what would be the cost for the LinkedIn profiles?
That would depend on whether we're doing, again, an appointment or not. I try to make it as reasonable as possible. But when you go to my website, just for everybody's knowledge, when you go to my website, you can see all of the prices broken down.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Wonderful. And I think just so that all of you know, we will be sharing a little bit more about our services so that you know what we're going to be doing. We'll do that at the end. Thanks for your question, Leslie, because I'm sure other people are wondering the same thing. As well, we will let you know how you can contact us if you would like to seek our assistance. So let's see, we have Marcela with a question on stage. Go ahead. Hello. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, good afternoon. I have a general question now that you mentioned about the ORCID ID. I have my Google Scholar profile in my resume. What would be the advantage of one over the other?
Well, that is something that I would need to look into. From what I understand with the ORCID ID, and I'm not entirely sure if this is, I think it would be different for the Google Scholar item that you mentioned there. But you know how academic articles that are published in journals have what's called a DOI, a digital object identifier?
Yeah.
All right. So the way that I understand ORCID is that it's kind of like a DOI for you as a researcher.
Oh.
So if I'm remembering correctly, it works kind of like that. I'm not as familiar with the Google Scholar one, so.
Yes, because usually in academia, the ORCID ID is better, or is what we use, but then for industry it seems to be confusing, so that's why I put the Google Scholar.
That is a really good thing to bring up. Yeah. Kacey, do you have any insight on that?
I personally don't, but I would say that if you're worried about it, have both. I know that that's a pain and that's more things to manage and update, because we should, as soon as we make an update or an addition to your resume, it should be an automatic go change your LinkedIn to match it and any other websites that you use to showcase your information. So while it might be repetitive and time tedious, I would just do it, make it easier for yourself, and just so you don't have to worry about it. Same thing, I would just make a little caveat with USA Jobs. Everything that I'm saying about resumes does not necessarily apply to USA Jobs. Jill, I know you're here. If you want to hop in at any point and talk about that, but do what USA Jobs is asking you to do. Put your information into their website, and it's going to not look pretty. It's not going to look like your standard resume anymore that you've created. But just if that's what the industry wants, that's what you follow, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. So I think it's about time for us to move on with some more content that we think will be helpful for you as you craft your resume or revise your resume for 2023. So Kacey, one of the things that my clients have been running into a lot is, and this is particularly with industry jobs, is they don't necessarily have the first interview with somebody who actually works at the company. It's usually with a recruiter. So for those of you who are changing careers, for those of you who are leaving academia like so many of us are doing, could you tell us a little bit more about recruiters and their role?
Sure. Yeah.
Because they're not content experts.
When
right?
you get to the recruiter, that's them just trying to make sure you're still interested, but also clarify, right, on anything that may not be clear from your resume, but also just to make sure to hear from you what your interests are and that you're still really interested in that position that you're applying for. So the recruiters tend to not be from the industry that you're applying for. So I use engineering as an example. From working in engineering, with engineering students, when I worked in higher ed, I worked with a lot of recruiters who work for, I live in Virginia, so I'm near, the different shipyards and things like that. We have a lot of engineering in this area. So typically the recruiters weren't engineers. They are somebody like us or somebody who has a bachelor's degree and is unsure what they want to do yet. So they're going to do recruiting, right? Because it's a good job. It allows you to do some travel typically. So the recruiters tend to not necessarily understand exactly what you're saying in your resume either. That's why it's so important to customize it and use the common language from the job descriptions so that they can make that connection. Going back to my example of switching the word students to clients, if you work in education, that is one simple thing that you can do to make it easier for the recruiter to make the connection. Those typically tend to be shorter calls. There's so much that can be asked in those calls. If you're asked about salary expectations, that's a whole other conversation that we could talk about on another day. But if you're asked if you're still interested, or maybe they're calling and saying, hey, I don't think that this is the right job, but you might be interested in this. That's exactly what happened with me at Paycor. So I had a call with one recruiter from a job I applied for. She's like, this isn't what you think it is because of how you're reading it. It was like a moment because that's exactly what recruiters and managers are doing when they read our resume. We think, yes, this is exactly relevant, and here's how I can match that experience. But if you're not using their language, they might miss it, right? So you just want to make sure that you're being as explicit as you can and make their job easier, especially if the recruiters are not going to be somebody from industry. Because I know when I was reading engineer resumes, I had no idea what the majority of them did, but it sounded really good, right? So you want to make sure that it's clear and easy to read and in the language that anyone, including a recruiter, would be able to understand.
Yeah, that makes sense. Good, thanks. So we have to be able to speak to these multiple audiences, right? We have to make sure that our resume is optimized so that the tracking software lets us through. And then we have to make sure that a recruiter can understand what we're doing, right? And then of course...
before we move on, sorry, Laura,
sure.
I think that a lot of people get overwhelmed when we are saying to folks, you should have a customized resume for the jobs that you're applying for, each job you're applying for. I would say that typically when I was leaving higher ed, I was looking at learning and development, recruiting, talent development / upward mobility, and then also customer success types of roles. And now I'm in implementation. So looking at those 4 different areas, I kind of had 4 different resumes. I didn't have a different resume for every single job that I applied for. I just had it based off of the different types of roles I was applying for. So I hope that eases some of your minds, because we're talking about it does take a lot of work to apply for positions. But once your resume is in a good spot, you can duplicate it and switch it as needed for different types of industries or roles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really important. So you don't have to write a fresh resume every time.
Exactly.
Good. All right. So we have a lot more, tips for you, but I want to take a second just to let you know that this is also a networking event. So as you can see in that live pop-up there on your computer or your phone, you see we have a whole bunch of people here joining us. Feel free to connect with them. Especially, please feel free to connect with Kacey and connect with me. And we are very happy to help answer your questions after this as well. Good. So we have recruiters, we have ATS. Of course, sometimes we have small companies and managers will also be looking at our resumes. But again, let's just keep the purpose in mind with these, that people are not going to spend much time on your resume, right? They're going to look at it and then decide if they want to actually read it. So that's what we're talking about. Good. All right. So, Kacey, you said we have to customize them, but we should have general items to keep in mind. But is there anything else that you want to say about customization?
Yes.
So that your employer can make the connection between your skills, your experiences, and the job that you're applying for?
Absolutely. One last thing that I would keep in mind, based off of what we planned on talking about today, is there are people out there who do research about career stuff. And for me, working in the higher education setting, I rely heavily on NACE. So this is a moment to take note of something to look up later if you are interested. NACE is the National Association for Colleges and Employers. And while I don't work in the higher ed setting anymore, I am interested in what employers are reporting out, right? So they do have a list of career readiness skills. So I'm going to just say them. You don't need to write them down, because you can go to the website, Google NACE Career Readiness, NACE, and you'll be able to read a little bit more about those. But these are, for your information, that based off of a study that NACE did, these are the skills across industry. No matter what type of work you do, there are skills that all employers are looking for. And those include career and self-development, communication, critical thinking, equity and inclusion, leadership, professionalism, teamwork, and technology. So that's another challenge for you to think about. Are these different skills in your resume somewhere? Because now that we know that across industry, from engineering to teachers to technology to doctors, that you need to have these skills. And they are expecting college graduates specifically to have them, but all of us should have them, especially those who have years of work experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's a lot to unpack there. So I think, let's see, how many of you might be interested if we would give another one of these live audio events just on career readiness, just on those skills from NACE that Kacey mentioned? Let's see, thumbs up or something. Oh yeah. Okay. So that looks useful. Thank you for your feedback.
We hear you.
All right, we'll
that
see.
That might not be till December though, everybody.
Yeah. Good. Okay, I'm glad. So along with that, I've got a list of tools that you can use to help you with your resume. I'd really like to share these with you because they will help you to make your resume better. And I do want to preface this by saying to you that if you contact Kacey or if you contact me, either sometime now or in the next day, you can just send us a message here on LinkedIn. We will send you a link because we want your feedback about this. And in return for your feedback, we have prepared for you a really nice checklist of things that you can keep in mind for your resume, as well as the tools that I'm about to mention to you, okay? So if you would like this checklist for your resume and you'd like the tools, send us a message and we'll send you the link to the feedback, and after that we'll be sharing it with you.
And if you did register in advance, we already have your email, so I will just email you directly with the link to the evaluation.
Perfect. Great. So some tools that you can use. Now, this all goes back to my experience with hiring, and I will tell you that the types of jobs that I was hiring for required attention to detail and care and being aware of who you're working with, right? So when I, on the rare occasion, would get resumes with major spelling errors or major grammar errors, I wouldn't even look at them. I would not consider them, okay? Because the job that I was hiring for required effective communication. And to communicate effectively, we do need to show that we can follow certain grammatical conventions and spelling conventions, right? So, and this even goes for those of us who grew up speaking other languages. If you don't feel as strong with your English, no problem. We've got tools that can help, all right? So, let's see. The first one, I hope, is not going to be too much of a surprise to you. This is called Grammarly, Grammarly, and it's basically your personal writing assistant who is always there to help you identify your spelling, your grammar, and your punctuation errors. So even the free version of Grammarly is really helpful for catching your errors, whether it's emails or resumes or cover letters, whatever. So check that out. And again, I will be linking all of these tools on the document if you give us feedback to today's event. So I know I definitely use Grammarly because I send off emails very quickly. There's no shame in that. And yes, I do teach writing. So yeah. Kacey, do you happen to use Grammarly?
I personally do not, and that probably isn't great to say because that's not promoting what you're promoting, but I don't.
Oh, it's fine.
Because I'm just so used to looking at resumes every day for years. So for me, I am able to pick up on that kind of stuff, but that does not mean you all shouldn't use Grammarly, right? Because I even tell people I should not be the only person looking at your resume. I should not be the only one looking for errors, right? Mm-hmm. You, as the creator of your document, will naturally have something mistyped or formatting will look weird, but you've looked at this document for hours and your brain fills in the gaps. Mm-hmm. Right. So it all looks fine. So oftentimes when I get resumes, I'm making a lot of like small formatting fixes, but when I send it back to you as a completed version of your resume, you'll either have notes on things that you still need to add in, and then you run it through Grammarly on your own, right? I'm not going to necessarily do that, but other people, family members who have not looked at your resume for hours can look at it and find common errors. Mm-hmm. It's just because you looked at it for so long, you sort of glance over all of those things.
Right. That's true. Good. So Grammarly is one. Now, for those of us who tend to write too much, how many of you feel like you are very wordy? You just have too much fluff in your writing. This is true for a lot of us. Well, guess what? There's an app for that, thankfully. That app is the Hemingway Editor app, right? Like the author, Hemingway. So this is HEMINGWAYAPP, HemingwayApp.com. And what it can do is help you cut out the fluff so that your writing is clear and concise, because you have to fit all of that information into a very small space. Now, the third tool that I want to share with you is something that'll help you with our computer overlords. Just kidding. No, they're not our overlords. I just like to joke. But anyway, the ATS scanner. So there are things that can help you run your resume through to see how those ATS scanners might take your resume, because, you know, like Kacey said, they're going to toss the least qualified people out. So you want to make sure that your resume gets to the next stage. You want to make sure you work in the key words from the description as well, right? So the first step, I would say, is to, look at your job title for what you're applying for. Try to get a few different job descriptions for that title. Now, when I say title, I mean something like, general manager or country head of whatever. Okay, so these are not specific to that particular job. Instead, they are the general title that is available in many different workplaces. And what you do is you can take those job descriptions and copy and paste them into a computer program that analyzes the text. And what it does is it pulls out the most frequently used words for the skills or the qualifications for that position. And what you can do is you can work those into your resume. So that way the ATS, the scanner says, oh, look, they have these words. So one of those text analyzers is www.online-utility.org/text/analyzer.jsp. So I will have a link to that in the sheet if you fill out the feedback form for us after the event. All right, so that's one of the things. And then, of course, we have plenty of free ATS scanners out there. So JobScan is one of the most popular ones. Kacey, you've had experience using JobScan, I'm sure. I'm sure she has. I'll let her unmute when she's ready.
I have a lot of dogs in my house and they're barking. I'm so sorry.
Goodness.
So I'm trying to spare everybody. But yes, I have used JobScan, and that's probably the most common one that anyone would use. So that's the one I would mostly endorse.
Great. Cool. Yeah, and I've read pretty much the same, and I've heard good things about it from my clients who've used it. Great. So yeah, there are a lot of tools. So we'll be sharing those with you, and as well as the checklist if you want to fill out a feedback form for us. It's a very short feedback form, but we would like for you to send us a message if you haven't already registered for these, so we can get that to you. Great. All right. So
as we wrap up, because I know that a couple of you are probably going to have to hop off, and Laura and I can stay a few minutes past 1, but I do just want to say before the majority of people hop off that this is not my full-time job, and I see a lot of you messaging me right now, and I love that, and I can't wait to connect with you. But don't think I'm ignoring you if I don't message you right after we hang up today, because I have to go back to my other job. I'm spending my lunch with you today. So thank you for your patience as I get back to responding to all of you. I appreciate that so much. And I do want to go over my services with you. If you are looking for the prices, they're on my website, which will be kschaum.weebly, weebly.com. So K and then my last name .weebly.com, and you will find all of the services and the pricing, and you can fill out a form on my website to let me know what service or services you would like to take advantage of. But just a quick overview, I do obviously help with resumes, cover letters. I do practice mock interviews. I help with LinkedIn, job search techniques. So anything that you can think of when it comes to career, I can help with. So please let me know how I can assist you in the future. And I will let Laura also go over what services she has.
Right. So for those of you who are really thinking that you have to just hit the ball out of the park on your interview, but you struggle to express yourself articulately, or for those of you who don't speak English as your first language, I can help you with that. So basically what I do is I help people to communicate more effectively in English, which is what we're all speaking right now. And so, yeah, just hit me up. I'm happy to help you through consultations. I also have a job interview preparation course that is just 6 sessions. It's not a whole lot of time, but it will help you to really be prepared for your interview so that you can shine. As far as your resume goes, I can help you proofread. We can also look for those optimum words from the job description together, and you can book single 30-minute or 60-minute sessions from my website. My website is www.englishforsustainability.com. That's ENGLISH 4 SUSTAINABILITY.com. Yes, I should have picked a shorter website name. But great. So yeah, let me know if you want to meet multiple times for consultations. You don't have to buy those one-off. I can give you a discount on bulk consultations. Great. So thank you all so much for joining us. I hope that you got a lot out of it. I'm so glad to see so many people still listening when we are on the hour here.
This is awesome.
Yeah. So
Thank you all.
we hope that you come to our session on November 2nd. I will I will open that up so that you can sign up for it now.
And I would just say, stay in touch with us, even if you don't come to a future session. And like Lara said, we would love to know more about what you want to hear in the future. So feel like you can message that as well to us. And we do hope to see you on November 2nd. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
So enjoy. We have about 5 minutes for questions. Thank you so much for your hand clapping, Colette. If anybody has any quick questions that you'd like to ask, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll invite you up on the stage. So we've got a question from John. Go ahead, John.
Okay. Good evening. You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, please. I just want to know whether there's another journal one can publish something about security.
If you want to know about journals where you can publish on security, I think the best way to go about that is to talk to a librarian, because librarians will be able to point you to reputable journals in that area.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Have a good evening. Great. Does anybody else?
Thank you. Bye.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. Does anybody else have any questions that they'd like to ask? If so, please raise your hand and I'll invite you up to the stage.
I am not seeing any other hands.
Here we go. Michelle. All right. Great. Michelle, go ahead. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for your knowledge and tips and tools you shared this morning. Just interested in, there's a lot of job search engines out there.
Yeah.
But for the professional, what are the preferred or suggested job search engines aside from LinkedIn, of course?
Yeah, I would say Indeed is probably one of the safer options. USA Jobs if you're looking for government type work, but you can't go wrong with going directly to a company's website. So if that's something that you're thinking about, like where would I even want to apply, I can help you with that in a career coaching session. So sometimes it's just best to go directly to the company's website, but LinkedIn and Indeed are the two that I typically suggest.
Great. Thank you very much for your questions. And thank you all for attending. We look forward to seeing you on November 2nd when we will talk about interviewing authentically and effectively.
Thanks for spending lunch with us for those who are on Eastern Standard Time.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you, Kacey.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, everybody.